Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us virtually tonight. My name is Maddie Walters, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm pleased to introduce this virtual event with Alec MacGillis, presenting his new book, Fulfillment, in conversation with Renée Loth. Through virtual events like tonight, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to you and others in our community during these challenging times. Every week, we're hosting events here on our Zoom, and as always, our event schedule appears on our website at harvard.com/events, where you can also sign up for our weekly email newsletter and browse our shelves from home. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time tonight, go to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get through as many as we can. In the chat box during this presentation, you'll see a link to purchase tonight's book online. All sales through this link support Harvard Bookstore, so thank you for your support during this trying time for community spaces like your local bookstores. You will also find a link to donate in the chat box. Your purchases and contributions make this virtual author series possible, and now more than ever supports the future of a landmark independent bookstore. Thank you for tuning in support of our authors and the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings through the past year, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly. Thank you for your patience and understanding. And now I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Alec MacGillis is the author of The Cynic, a 2014 biography of Mitch McConnell. He is also a senior reporter for ProPublica, where he covers politics and government and has received many honors, which include the 2016 Robin Toner Prize for Excellence in Political Reporting and the 2017 Polk Award for National Reporting. His work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and more. Renée Loth is an opinion columnist for the Boston Globe. In a distinguished journalism career, Renée has held several high-profile positions at the Globe, including presidential campaign reporter, political editor, and editor of the editorial page, where for 9 years she was the highest-ranking woman at the newspaper. She has also edited Architecture Boston magazine and twice served as the judge for Pulitzer Prizes in journalism. Tonight, they're discussing Alec's new best-selling book, Fulfillment, Winning and Losing in One-Click America, which was praised by Jacob Hacker, co-author of Let Them Eat Tweets, as journalism at its very best. And the Boston Globe reflects that MacGillis has taken the ubiquity of Amazon and blown it up into something on the scale of Homer's Odyssey. I'm so pleased to turn things over to tonight's speakers. Alec and Renée, the digital podium is all yours.
Well, thank you, Maddie. I am just so delighted to be here tonight to help discuss Alec MacGillis's timely and provocative new book, Fulfillment, Winning and Losing in One-Click America. And, you know, this tonight is sort of also a hands across the generations event for me because Alec's late father, Donald MacGillis, was a longtime colleague and a good friend of mine at the Boston Globe for many years. And so it's apparently journalistic excellence runs in the family. So welcome, Alec, tonight.
Thank you, Renée. Thanks so much for hosting this, for moderating this, and thanks to the bookstore also for hosting it. I've wished so much in doing this sort of book tour that I was able to go to actual places because the book is very much about places, and it would be wonderful to actually be in the places and talk about the places and meet people in the places, but this is certainly much better than nothing. And so I've been grateful for events like this.
Yeah, great. You know, I really like this book, I have to say, and I hope you can see all of my many flags marking all of the like wow moments that I came across writing this book. There is a zinger on every page. And you readers and audience out there, as we heard earlier, can order this book right through the Harvard Bookstore. At any time, there'll be a chat box link down at the bottom of your screen. So I hope you'll do that and support not only Alec and his book, but the Harvard Bookstore, which is kind of the anti-Amazon, a great local institutions. So I hope that everybody out there will have a chance to do that as well. The book was just published this week. It's only been out really formally for a couple of days. And as Maddie mentioned, it's been compared to the Odyssey and also to the HBO series, The Wire. It's all of the reviews have been universal raves at this point. But for me, it brings to mind the sort of in the tradition of that book, Evicted by Matt Desmond, which came out a couple of years ago and won the Pulitzer Prize. I hope they're listening out there. Because, each book is a deeply reported sort of personal story that illuminates, a policy dilemma or a policy crisis. In the case of Evicted, it was the homeless and housing crisis. Here, it's the crisis of the continuing division of wealth and income in our country. And Amazon is a big part of it. It's not the only part of the book, but it really it's really relatable because there are so many great personal stories that show how Amazon has changed our lives, our communities, and the way we do business. So I just wanted to start by asking you, Alec, how did you come to write this book? And if you'll explain to us how that happened and how sort of Amazon almost kind of crept up on you.
Right. Well, it's a very good question. And your mention of Evicted is apropos, actually, because I loved that book. And it was definitely a model for me as I set out to do this book. And I think I may even have mentioned it in my proposal as one of the sort of comparable examples that they ask you to provide for what your book is aspiring to. But you're right, this book kind of came to Amazon secondarily. This book really started out being about my longtime obsession with the issue of regional inequality. And it's an issue that for me probably goes all the way back to growing up in Pittsfield, out in Western Mass. That's why it's very appropriate that we're having one of the first events here in Boston, Cambridge tonight, because for me, growing up in Pittsfield, a once thriving, solidly middle-class small city that was very much sort of kind of at or above the state average in kind of income and wealth in Massachusetts, and has greatly declined over the decades through my upbringing, thanks mainly to the departure of GE, and watching the city fall so far behind Boston, Greater Boston, and Eastern Mass, sort of as Metro Boston was growing more and more wealthy, kind of through the growth of the sort of tech economy in Boston, and Boston becoming a real example of kind of a winner-take-all city that was just accruing more and more wealth, almost to the point of excess, to the point where it was getting unmanageable for people in the city. And so that was kind of the kernel for me, the Boston-Pittsfield example. But then I went on in my career and I was at the Washington Post around the time of the Great Recession and doing a lot of traveling in the Midwest as a political reporter, and seeing how much people were struggling in all these towns and cities in the Midwest, just one town after another that broke my heart. And then coming back to Washington and just being stunned by the wealth in Washington, the disconnect from what was happening out there, the kind of complacency, because people just had no idea how rough things were out there, because things were going so well in Washington. It had barely been nicked even by the Great Recession there. And then the third sort of part of it was moving back to Baltimore 8 years ago with my family, and just being struck by that divide, the growing divide between these two cities that are just 40 miles apart, that have grown light years apart in terms of their prosperity and dynamism, and being really kind of dismayed by that, and thinking, how do I write about this problem? Something's happening in our country. We've always had richer and poorer places, but they've gotten much wider apart. And what I finally settled on after the Trump election, when I decided that I really had to write a book about this, was using Amazon as the frame. And Amazon works as the frame for this for two reasons. One is that it's so ubiquitous in our country now that it simply serves as a good thread to take you around America. It's just a really really is it's a very handy way to sort of show how all of us are living. It's present everywhere in very physical ways, but in very different ways. But it's also a handy frame because it is itself an explanation and a cause of this regional inequality. There's a strong connection between the concentration of our economy in these tech giants that have come to dominate so many sectors of the economy, and the regional inequality, because put bluntly, so much of our wealth and prosperity now flows to the cities where they are based. They're drawing so much of our wealth and business activity into the places where they are most prevalent. And Boston is, for Amazon, now very much one of those towns.
Yes, I have to say I was, when that sweepstake was going on a couple of years ago for Amazon's second headquarters, and so many cities were bidding, and offering tax breaks and, special deals and just anything they could to lure the second headquarters to their cities. I was so proud and kind of smug, that Boston was not among those who, supplicated themselves too much. They thought the city was, in its proposal, which I read, talked a lot about, how we have this brainy, populace, we have all the universities, we have a lot of, quality workers, but we really weren't, throwing money around. And yet, I'm sort of jumping ahead to later in the conversation maybe, but now we are facing here in Boston the possibility of one of these Amazon fulfillment warehouses down in Dorchester in the Whiteout Circle area. And I don't think that's what anybody expected would be our experience of Amazon in this city.
Right, and actually, even more to the point about HQ2 is the fact that Boston is now the home of thousands of exactly the kind of high salary professional engineer programming jobs for Amazon that HQ2 would have brought. It's not called HQ2, but what Amazon has essentially done is kind of more quietly send a whole bunch of these kind of jobs, the really well-paid kind of headquarters type jobs, to various very sort of wealthy cities without calling it HQ2. HQ2 ended up going to Washington, but Boston now it was just announced it's going to get 3,000 more of those jobs in the Seaport District, which will bring the total between Boston and Cambridge of headquarters type Amazon jobs to 7,000, which is, almost a third, a third or a quarter as many as would have come with the HQ2 that DC is getting. And so, and they're setting those kind of jobs now. Also, the Bay Area has gotten a lot of Amazon jobs. Austin has them. New York's getting a whole bunch more. So you're seeing that kind of effect even without the kind of rubric, the official rubric of HQ2.
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the many things I liked about this book is how you talk about the continuing and growing divide between the haves and the have-nots, the 99% and the 1%. But not just among people, you talk about that divide among places. And I think that's something that we haven't really focused enough on, that there's a 99% of places, and then there's the 1%, Boston being among the 1%. One of the things that really got me when I actually, I put one of my little flags on it, was the story you told about a community in Ohio where there was a warehouse, big fulfillment center, and during the Christmas rush, where workers were really working hard, and there were a fair amount of calls to the emergency number, the fire department or the EMTs, to come to the warehouse because people were having chest pains or short of breath or some injuries. Some of them were quite serious, but even minor injuries. And you said, it was nothing that the local fire department couldn't handle, but it was so galling because Amazon, in order to agree to locate in this community, had gotten a 15-year property tax exemption. Yeah. So they weren't even paying for the EMTs and for the fire department, right, in that community. And yet they were availing themselves of this, crucial local service. And, to make matters worse, the ordinary community people, the ordinary residents of this town now had to pay more for the fire and the EMT because Amazon was draining those resources. I don't even know what the question is there.
No, it's appalling. I mean, it's one of the things I was most stunned by in my reporting, in my research, was just how aggressive Amazon was about seeking those tax credits and subsidies, just how desperate and obsequious local officials were in dealing with them. I got a lot of emails through public information requests that just showed town officials promising not to give anything to the press, apologizing when they did have to occasionally give things to the press. One town official in Ohio, Southwest Ohio, apologizing after a reporter quoted her in a story saying, "I didn't agree to talk to him. He just accosted me, in the parking lot and got a line out of me. I'm so sorry, it won't happen again." The other things I was startled by that I found were, on this point, were some of these injuries. Just how much I got a lot of OSHA, federal safety regulator reports. I kept requesting them all around the country. And one of the most remarkable ones I got in Ohio was a report on accidents that had happened in one warehouse after Amazon had assigned some legally blind people to drive forklifts, which did not turn out well. And that accident was not fatal, fortunately, but I do also have two very heartbreaking excerpts, or sort of kind of mini chapters in the book on two fatal accidents at the exact same warehouse in Pennsylvania, where I was able to get just a lot of details on those episodes, and it just really kind of shows you the reality of what is actually happening inside these vast windowless spaces.
That's right. And in those cases, as I recall in the book, OSHA, which we depend upon to investigate these kinds of industrial accidents and issue some sort of, punishment or fine or something that will prevent further accidents like this, really was a kind of a toothless watchdog in these cases, and really didn't come to any conclusion at all.
There's no fine for either, even though one of them actually involved a clear failing on Amazon's part, a clear failing to deal with a problem that had been warned about involving a certain kind of delivery vehicle, pallet mover, and this had been warned about, and they knew about it, they didn't deal with it, and a woman was crushed to death as a result.
Right. Given that kind of reality and the power that Amazon has, it brings to mind the question of what levers are there if it's not government regulation or the oversight committees that we have to police the activities inside one of these warehouses? What levers do we have?
So I think of this in three parts.
Okay.
One is organizing. All right. And we're seeing right now, there's an amazing thing happening in Alabama where there's actually an organizing campaign, an election underway at a warehouse in Alabama. And we'll know the results in a few weeks. And that would be a really big deal if they got organized there. It'd be the first time in any of these warehouses. And it would really kind of possibly put these warehouses on the sort of same historical arc that the manufacturing plants of, were on last century, where they were also incredibly grueling work, low paid, very little worker power, workers say, incredibly, grueling productivity quotas, all that. But then they got organized and things got better at those mills and at those plants. So we could possibly get on that cycle with these warehouses. The second lever is a Washington one, which is antitrust. The book implicitly leaves one with it's not an argument book, but it leaves you with the implicit conclusion that we're going to need to do something to break these guys up, both the Amazon and the others, that they've just gotten so huge and so dominant that we really are in a way back to the Gilded Age, with Standard Oil and all the rest. And that one way to deal with not just better worker conditions, but this problem of regional inequality is going to be to somehow to disperse things, in an antitrust kind of way. The third lever is more on us, right? And I mean, we as citizens can support the first two also by actually caring about the worker organizing and supporting politicians who are trying to bring back antitrust. But the third lever is also on us as consumers. And I do believe that we all have a role to play, and not necessarily in terms of any kind of, massive boycott or anything like that. I don't advocate that. I'm not an absolutist. I occasionally order from Amazon if I can't find something somewhere else. I'm not a dogmatist about it. But there is something that's happened this last year, we have to be honest, where we as Americans decided to order a heck of a lot more from this company. And one reason that things got so much more high pressure and so much crazier in these warehouses is that there was a massive surge in orders from all of us Americans. Sales were up 40, 50% year over year. They've had to hire 500,000 more workers, not counting the drivers. Their stock's gone up 86%. Bezos's personal wealth has gone up 58 billion in 1 year. They've had to find 50% more warehouse space. The reason they're having to find space in and around Boston is that there's so many people in Boston who are buying more stuff from them. And something happened this past year where a lot of Americans decided that this kind of purchase that before had maybe some kind of compunction or stigma attached to it, that they can now do freely without stigma. And feel almost righteous about it, right? You were following public health orders, you were bending the curve, you're staying home. And it will be, that is one lever that Americans, to see if whether Americans as citizens and consumers can kind of get out of that bubble and kind of re-engage with their communities and not just keep abetting the growth of this unaccountable giant.
I was thinking about that expression, that Amazon is the company that we love to hate, but I actually think it's more like it's the company that we hate to love. Because, so many of us do order from Amazon and have found that in this last year of the pandemic, what used to be a convenience, we could tell ourselves was a necessity. It was, as you said, even a kind of virtue signal that we were, not going into stores and ordering online instead. When I think about the difference between, for example, Amazon and Walmart, which was had a similar arc of, communities opposing it because of what it does to the downtown retail and how it's a category killer and all of this. And yet there's some sort of class difference between Amazon and Walmart. Am I right? I mean,
huge.
What is that?
The class difference between them is that as universal as Amazon has become, there's the market's research studies show that there's still a difference in the primary consumers of the two companies, and Walmart's is still definitely stronger in more rural places, small towns, more lower income demographic, and Amazon, as universal as it is strongest among upper middle class, urban consumers, high educated consumers. There's a reason why they need to have, more warehouses in Boston, or why they're putting more warehouses in New York now, because that market is so strong for them. And this is political too. I mean, just a year or two ago, there was a serious poll from Pew, I think, showing asking Democrats and Republicans who their most respected institutions in America were. And for Republicans, the most respected institutions were the military and police. For Democrats, the very top, most admired institution was Amazon.
Wow.
Ahead of the press, ahead of higher education, ahead of unions, had a lot of things that you think are sort of like liberal totems.
I was talking about this book with my perfectly good liberal father-in-law, for example. And he said, well, but Amazon, they pay $15 an hour. They pay that $15 an hour minimum wage. Isn't that really, aren't they bringing good jobs, to these communities? And yet when in reading your book, I even though that may be true, it feels to me like that's a kind of like a smokescreen to obscure the working conditions that are going on in these warehouses that I think nobody really knows about.
Right. And
As you
so
said,
much so much what they're fighting for in Alabama is not just higher pay. It's also just having more say. I mean, having more. It's such incredibly regimented and sort of monotonous, tedious, demoralizing kind of work with such extreme quotas. I mean, there's a reason why these jobs have such high turnover, and it's because they really are that grueling, that tough on, on your whole body, really. I mean, it's really. I went through the application process for a job at a warehouse in Baltimore and decided not to take it, even though I got the job. But one thing they stressed in our first orientation session was just how grueling it was. And basically, you are going to walk a whole lot of miles a day. You are going to have to lift up to 50 pounds. And just and often the monotony of it is just, and just the lack of breaks. And it really is tough work in that regard. So yeah, the $15 an hour raise by them was a very deft political ploy. And they're wielding it now as a kind of a cudgel, almost against rivals, because they've come out to support a $15 minimum wage nationwide, because they know that actually that might be tougher for some of their smaller competitors to afford, whereas they can afford it. But you have to ask, is that really the best we can do? I mean, these jobs are so tough. Amazon likes to compare these jobs to retail jobs, and they say, yes, we've destroyed retail, brick and mortar retail, but these jobs, in some cases, pay more than some of those kind of cash register kind of jobs in retail. But these are different jobs than retail jobs, actually. They're much more difficult. They're much more grueling. They're much more actually like old style production jobs, and they're paid less than those kind of jobs. So is it really, when you have this incredible growth of a company that's seeing its revenues come in so much higher, where its founder's wealth has increased $58 billion in a year, is $15 really the best we can do? And one last point on Walmart, I would just point quickly, because a lot of people bring up Walmart and say, well, isn't Walmart just as bad? Yes, Walmart destroyed downtowns. Walmart, also just did great damage to the American landscape. But Walmart also pays a lot more taxes. It's a really important difference between them, precisely because Walmart is so much more physical and has not been able to avoid taxes through all the loopholes that Amazon has by being sort of in the ether. Walmart pays infinitely more taxes to all levels of government than does Amazon.
Right. And so what's sort of unsaid there is the way that Amazon also destroys communities, because not only are these jobs not your traditional retail jobs, but, what does it do to the social fabric of the community not to have a local store, the diners, the other, ancillary businesses that, make up the sort of local connections. A lot of that gets lost. Even the sort of pedestrian experience of walking down a main street is different if there are no active storefronts there, if it's a warehouse or some sort of fulfillment center, or just a place with a couple of desks. It's just a different experience entirely.
Right.
One of the other things that when you're talking about how aggressive Bezos and his company is toward taxes, it reminded me of another story you told in here, which got me at the time, which was in Seattle. And this is also another way in which Amazon pretends to be sort of liberal and, virtue signaling. In Seattle, there was a ballot question to raise taxes in order to pay for the homelessness crisis in Seattle. And, Amazon argued against it and fought it, and it passed. And then they managed to get the city council to rescind the new ordinance. just bad behavior. But then Bezos gave like a huge philanthropic donation. I can't remember how much, maybe $1 billion to Seattle precisely for homelessness crisis and for education. And so making himself look like the hero in the story. And, you know, some people might say, well, what's wrong with that? You know, if the guy has a ton of money and he's going to give it away to good causes, doesn't that, you know, mitigate whatever opposition he has to taxes on the company? What would you say to that?
Yeah, this is one of the core episodes in the book, really, and it was this fascinating fight that happened in Seattle, where Seattle has this terrible homelessness problem or housing affordability problem, largely because of Amazon, which now has 40,000 employees in the city, and just is completely transformed the city, and so there was an effort to raise money to deal with this problem, and they passed a tax, and this is key. They passed the tax with Amazon's grudging agreement. Amazon kind of worked them down to a lower amount, and it really wasn't going to be that much. It was going to be pennies for Amazon. But then 2 days after agreeing to this lower amount, after the mayor signed this new tax into law, Amazon launched a referendum to get it repealed. It was just incredible, cynicism, really. And what was so depressing about that episode was how actually receptive a lot of people in Seattle, in liberal Seattle, were to Amazon's arguments that the government was just going to waste the money, that it wasn't going to solve the problem anyway. It was this very kind of anti-government message and kind of a very NIMBY message. We don't want homeless shelters built in our neighborhood. We don't want affordable housing built in our neighborhood. And they tapped into a very kind of ugly strain in Seattle, a city that voted 90% for Hillary Clinton, and you could see this kind of conflicted feelings that people in Seattle have toward Amazon. And I think it's somewhat similar at a smaller scale to what you have in a place like Boston, where there's this on the one hand, people realize, yes, these companies are sort of bad, and yes, they're creating traffic in our city and the homelessness problem. But my gosh, my property value's gone up. I got my little craftsman bungalow. I bought it for $200 grand. It's $1 million now. This is great. I live in a rich city. And there's a pride that comes with that. And I think there's that in Boston too, where there's a pride that comes with we're doing okay, even though in theory, yes, we know that these companies that are like coming to our town are, have some issues. But hey, at least they're coming to us and not elsewhere. Those are our guys. And Amazon tapped into that. They got the tax repealed. Then, yes, the company, kicked some philanthropic dollars toward the problem. But that leaves us with the question: do we really want it up to the behest, the whim of companies and zillionaires whether to address problems like this, or is it something that we're going to decide as a democratic people? And finally, I want you to note that even as philanthropic going goes, Bezos has been notoriously parsimonious.
Yeah. And in any case, I mean, as you say, this is why we have government, to, serve the needs of the people. And yes, that, rich people can give philanthropy, and it's a great thing. But what about the unpopular causes that, it's still a need that's out there. Right. One of the other things you talk about in the book, and in a few minutes we'll go to the Q&A. I see they're starting to pile up. One of the other things you talk about in the book is the crisis in local news reporting, and how, this is something close to my heart, and how Amazon has taken advantage of that void. It's sort of a cyclical thing, the communities get hollowed, these smaller communities, small cities get hollowed out, partly by the sort of driver of inequality that Amazon is. And then there's nobody to cover the OSHA violations or the, working conditions, or the fact that, all of these small businesses are going under and so on.
Yes, I mean, in fact, Amazon has actually played a direct role in the decline of local journalism. We think usually of Google and Facebook as the main villains in this regard, because they're getting such a huge share. They have their own monopoly, and they're getting such a huge share of of digital ad revenue, more than 60% of all digital ad revenue in the country goes to these two companies. Amazon, though, is now getting a larger and larger share of that as well as its ad business grows. But even before that, you have to keep in mind that to the extent that they've helped to destroy brick and mortar retail and department stores, regional department stores, those were some of the biggest advertisers for local newspapers, those stores. But just think about those old, the circulars inside the Sunday paper and how much, or the actual display ads in the paper, and those are gone. And one reason for that is Amazon's, really kind of rapacious destruction of brick and mortar retail. And now we're left with this void, and Amazon's very good at exploiting, and not just because things don't get covered, but because they're actually able to even basically often insert pure PR stuff into the local media. And they'll just hand over a whole video segment about the opening of the new warehouse, a happy 5-minute thing on the new warehouse in town that'll sometimes get run basically just as is by the local TV station that has barely any more reporters.
Right. I mean, one of the many ironies is how many of these fulfillment centers are going into dead shopping malls, replacing brick and mortar stores that, maybe the malls were bad for the local downtowns, but now at least now Amazon's taking over even for those spaces. And, because there's no brick and mortar customers. And of course, all of it's been, exacerbated by the pandemic. Yeah. Wow. All right. I'm going to see, I think, if there's some questions. I have to loom in here. Remember that you can order the book by looking to the chat box down below. It's really worth it. And, make sure that you have a good collection of these flags, because you're going to be flagging every page. Trust me. Okay. Oh, there's 5 questions. Let me see. I'm sorry. I need to do this, loom in here and read these. Somebody has said, what an amazing human being you are. I'll second that. Oh, interesting about your reporting. Given the amazing and horrific stories that you tell about Amazon, were workers afraid of talking to you? I'm sorry, that jumped. Were workers afraid of talking to you, considering, the authority that Amazon has, not only over their jobs, but over their communities? And how did you deal with that?
They were worried about talking to me, and the way I dealt with it, there's one person in the book, the worker who actually opens up the book at a warehouse in suburban Denver, who was just terrified on the job this past year, because he was so terrified of bringing home coronavirus to his house, which included his elderly mother-in-law, that he basically moved into the basement, and the last I heard is actually still living in the basement, which is the saddest story. He's basically deserted his whole family. He's still worried about giving them the virus. And in his case, his is the only case in the book where I gave him a pseudonym, because he's still working at the warehouse. Quite a few of the workers, there's such turnover at the warehouse that quite a few of the workers I spoke to are no longer there. And so there was, including a very central character who went from working at a steel mill to an Amazon warehouse in the exact same location. Just an incredible story. And he quit a year or two ago, in a huff, because the warehouse work was so degrading. In his case, I could use his name because he's no longer there. So, but in the case of the Colorado worker, I did give him a pseudonym.
Yeah, and as I recall, that worker only found out that COVID was in the facility, in the warehouse, from other workers. They had, the company didn't even tell him, right?
No.
So there's a lot of secrecy that Amazon employs that I really wasn't aware of, in terms of, they're negotiating with communities, and as you said earlier, apologizing if somebody even gets quoted. The community is sort of, the leadership locally is kind of in cahoots there.
Right.
Here's another question. In 25 years, Amazon has gone from a bookstore to now the everything store. Drawing on your reporting, what sectors do you think Amazon might try to conquer next? Transportation, energy, healthcare? I think I saw something about healthcare in today's paper.
there was something about healthcare on today's paper. They're making a whole another push there, even though their first push actually kind of fell apart a few months ago. There's a lot of hubbub around a venture between them, and I think it was them, JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway a couple years ago announced this big alliance to sort of like solve the healthcare problem and kind of take over healthcare. And Boston's own Atul Gawande was kind of the guy put in charge of that. But it actually came to naught. So not everything they touch turns to gold. But yeah, healthcare is a big one. There are, if the transportation one is huge. I mean, the extent to which they are clearly trying to take over all delivery. That's something big that's happened these last couple of years, where it used to be that they were okay with just having FedEx, UPS, and the Postal Service deliver a lot of stuff for them. But now, as we all know, they have their own fleet, their own airplanes, their own ships, even there, and of course these ubiquitous vans. I mean, the vans have become so creepy. I mean, the day that I sent my book into my publisher, like the very moment I clicked send, a van pulled up like right in front of my house. It was just, and so it's really quite possible that they're going to have you can see them actually. There's some talk now of them actually starting to deliver for other people. They're going to have such an incredible fleet that they could actually, and the way that they do this is that one way they do this, that they've taken things over like this, is that if you as a third-party seller, which is a huge part of their retail operation now, it's way more than half their sales are now other people selling stuff on the site. And if you agree to have them deliver for you, you get promoted higher on the site. So people are more likely to buy your stuff. And
of course they take a cut. Amazon takes a
huge cut,
significant cut, right?
And that came up in the hearing that Bezos had to testify at last summer. It actually was one of the tougher moments for him when he was asked about that.
And this is just something I don't know. The drivers of the vans, are they $15 an hour workers, or are they contract employees?
They're all contract. There's 500,000 of them, and they're all contract. I was doing an interview today on New York Public Radio, and two of them actually called in to say how tough their life was, and how they just had none of even the minimal sort of like benefits and pay raises that warehouse workers were getting, they weren't even getting. So even though they've gotten, it's crazy, they're in Amazon trucks, they've got Amazon uniforms, and they're about to now get Amazon AI surveillance. There was an amazing story that came out a couple of weeks. Amazon is going to install cameras in those vans that are going to watch these drivers at all times, and they have AI so that if they see them looking at their phone or eating a sandwich in the van, a voice will come on and say, "Hey, stop eating your sandwich," or surveyed for safe driving, but who knows what.
Yeah. Wow. It's like in the warehouses, they have these, timed bathroom breaks. I mean, to me, reading about those warehouses, those jobs, it sounded like working in a sweatshop. So, I mean, maybe you're on the open road, it's a little bit less oppressive, but if you're surveilled by the company at every moment, wow. Right. And so how are the drivers paid then? Are they paid by the piece that they deliver, or do you know?
No, they have, they're on hourly rates paid, by these contractors that are, basically set up only to do Amazon deliveries, but it'll be, Joe's drivers, and you just have a whole bunch of these in given places, and they're all Amazon drivers, and they're paid hourly. And but and one of the most heartbreaking, I think, moments in the book is the death of two of these drivers at an Amazon warehouse here in Baltimore, where a poorly constructed warehouse wall came down in a high wind and crushed two of them. And the worst part of it was that, like, the main sort of Amazon comment that came out of this was, first of all, these were not Amazon employees, but they were delivering only Amazon stuff. and two, we apologize to our customers because there can be some delays in the next couple weeks because this warehouse was damaged. So please bear with us as we, it might take more than 2 days.
Yeah, wow. Oh, and one thing that I wonder about, because I'm kind of super sensitive to noise, is whether the drone delivery proposals that Amazon has are going anywhere, or are all of these distribution centers going to take care of that? I mean, that's like 30-minute delivery or something.
Right. No, they're serious about that. They are very, I didn't put this in the book, but one of my most delightful moments of reporting was sitting at the coffee shop that's below the Amazon lobbying building in DC, and sitting there one day, and a whole bunch of their drone lobbyists sat down at the table next to me, and were just kind of bragging about all the success they were having pushing their drone stuff. So.
Wow, I would like to leave the skies for birdsong if I can. I mean, I guess this is a question that I have about the whole internet economy and the Amazon effect, which is, I mean, this race to the bottom that so many communities are engaged in to try to lower and lower and lower the amount of revenue that they're going to ask of these companies, and where does it stop? And how does it end?
Well, I think one bright note is that there are some communities now that have been pushing back on this. Even ones that not necessarily even ones that would seem to be in need of jobs, ones that are generally in struggling areas, not Boston type towns, but you are seeing some growing awareness about this problem. And here and there are plenty of places that still are, I know just last year, Akron announced that this long dead mall, this like notoriously dead mall in Akron, was going to become a warehouse, and the town officials were very happy about this. They're just some of these places are just so desperate that they feel like they can't help it. They have no choice. It was, here in Baltimore, I was at the grand opening of the first warehouse here in Baltimore, and it was just heartbreaking to watch the mayor, then mayor, and a local congressman just being so obsequious. I mean, just after having turned over all these tax subsidies, praising Amazon, saying, I love you, Amazon. They actually said, you deliver me my deodorant on time. You deliver me my skin lotion on time. It was just, that it has sort of come to this. But this is the key thing, that the regional inequality has gotten so bad. The gap between the Bostons and the Baltimores is so bad right now, between Baltimore and Washington, that the cities that have become kind of the warehouse towns just feel like they at least have to, settle for the warehouses. But that's what we're looking at right now. We're looking at places like Washington that are getting the headquarters jobs. 25,000 high-paid jobs are going to Washington, which is the richest city in the country. They don't need those jobs. It's gonna mean only less affordability, only more traffic, and only more displacement of longtime Washington residents, Black residents. And then just up the road in Baltimore, we're getting the warehouse jobs. And Amazon's not the only company responsible for that sorting, but it's a huge driver of it. And it's such an unhealthy gap that's being created. And it's bad for both sides. It's bad for the Bostons that deal with terrible affordability problems, and it's bad for the left behind cities, obviously.
Yeah, when we think about the growing divide in this country, between the haves and the have-nots, a lot of the understanding of it has been that it's kind of a rural-urban divide. But one of the revelations of your book, I think, is that it's not. It's also city to city. I mean, you have this tale of two cities between Washington and Baltimore is only one example, but that it's not just rural-urban, that it's urban-urban.
And this is something I think is missed a lot in the housing debates within cities like Boston. You have this constant fight within cities like Boston between the people who want to make housing more affordable by building more supply, which then gets into the whole NIMBY problem. And then you have the people who want to make housing more affordable by controlling rents. And that's a vicious fight, sort of intra-liberal fight within these cities like Boston and Washington. What that misses is the broader context, which is that you wouldn't have such a terrible affordability problem in these cities if there wasn't so much for wealth and prosperity and growth concentrated in those cities. If you had, wealth and growth and jobs shared more broadly, even say within Massachusetts, within, the Fitchburgs and Lawrences and the New Bedfords and the Pittsfields and the Springfields and all the rest of them, the Fall Rivers, but instead it's all Boston, and so you end up with this terrible situation where if it were shared more generally, your crisis wouldn't be as bad in Boston, but that gets missed, and the fight becomes so sort of, in a way, kind of myopic. It's just sort of very kind of in the bubble of without thinking about that broader context.
That's right. And there becomes a competition that's really unhealthy for everybody.
Right.
I have a question that's, I know that this book is only 2 days old, and fulfillment, you can order it at the bottom of your screen. There'll be a tab there, and you'll support also the anti-Amazon, which is the Harvard Bookstore. So I know it's only 2 days old, but I can't help but wonder, like, what's next for you? What other projects you're thinking about? Because it's so, I mean, you're going to be on this rocket ship of publicity for a long time, I think, with this book, but you must be thinking about something about tomorrow. So what have you got planned?
Yeah, I loved writing the book, and I want to write more books, and I love the whole process of it. And I've thought for a while actually about doing a book focused more on Pittsfield, and the story of Pittsfield, almost kind of a investigative kind of memoir that kind of gets into what GE has done in the city, and that's one possibility. And that book could also, of course, include the story of local journalism and my father, and what the role of local journalism. And I've had a long time fascination with the coal industry, actually, because I spent a lot of time reporting in Appalachia, and I've been thinking about doing something on sort of the global attempt to get beyond coal and sort of to save the world from emissions, but how you do that without leaving places behind and causing just terrible bitterness and political resentment of the sort that we've seen in recent years. So those are two areas that I'm definitely interested in.
Wow, that's great. Thank you. I don't know. I'm just going to look and see if there's any other questions, but maybe Allie wants to come back and, here's a question about whether this is maybe, it's obvious, maybe I should have asked it earlier. If you think that Jeff Bezos's, recent announcement that he's going to be stepping down as CEO will, materially affect the way that Amazon does business and its trajectory into the future.
No. I thought that move was kind of overhyped as a big event. He's still going to be involved. He's going to be, obviously still have a big hand in things. His replacement, has sort of learned at his knee for years now, just decades. I think I and a lot of other people read that move as his attempt to kind of get out of the spotlight right when things are going to start getting hot now, with some movement in Washington and on antitrust. It's a really big deal what's happening now in Washington. There's some actual real possibility of action there. The early signs from the Biden administration are encouraging in that regard. And so I think Bezos did not want to be sitting at that table anymore. Now this guy's going to have to do it.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, and we should have I think the last ballots in the Alabama unionization campaign are due on March 30th. So very soon we
Right.
might have some results there. And, I don't mind saying I'm rooting for them.
Yeah.
So, wow. Thank you. So Allie, do you want to take it back? Maddie. Allie was last week. Maddie.
Yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you again to both of you, Alec and Renee, for a wonderful night in. And thanks to all of you out there too for spending your evening with us. You can learn more and purchase tonight's book, Fulfillment, through the link in the chat box. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore here in Cambridge, Mass, have a good night, keep reading, and please be well.
Thank you.